Hi, this is Jordan Ramirez, and normally I host my podcast show, Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. Now, I am hosting a special show for my podcast, Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez Minisode, Jordan Ramirez Recommends. The minisodes are now airing every Monday at 12 p.m. as part of the Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez podcast. So, without further ado, you are listening to a Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez Minisode. For my 13th episode, my recommended film is the avant-garde horror film Dracula: Pages from a Virgin's Diary, released in 2002, directed by Guy Maddin, starring Wei Qiang-zhang, Tara Birtwistle, and David Moroni. If you are familiar with the story, it's a story about a young woman named Lucy Westenra, played by Tara Birtwistle, who becomes the latest victim of Count Dracula, played by Wei Qiang-zhang, after being seduced and hypnotized by the Count himself. She tries to keep the bite marks hidden from her own suitors, Arthur Holmwood, played by Stefan Leonard, Jack Seward, played by Matthew Johnson, and Quincy Morris, played by Keir Knight. It isn't until Dr. Van Helsing, played by David Moroni, discovers the puncture marks from her neck that she has been turned into a vampire, and the only way that she has to be turned back into a human is through a blood transfusion. It's a story that everyone is familiar with if you have read the novel or seen different film or television versions of the story. The film, in my opinion, is a faithful adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula that was later adapted as a ballet play by Mark Godin, who also wrote the screenplay for the film. If you are familiar with the other versions of Bram Stoker's novel, this film is a uniquely surreal and offbeat version that is also somewhat faithful to its own source material, but still manages to feel different from a visual perspective. When one is thinking of the casting of Count Dracula, one would usually think of a European actor or a British actor to play the famous literary and film character. But in this version, which I think is a unique choice from a story perspective, is the casting of Chinese-Canadian actor Wei Qiang-zhang as the vampiric count. He has that presence that is both commanding and sexually erotic that makes the character fascinating on the screen. But I think one of the reasons that he was cast in this story, which is appropriate, is the ongoing theme of xenophobia, taking the cue from the Bram Stoker novel. What I also like about this version of Dracula is the use of silent film techniques to capture this mood and period. The use of sound effects that are added later in the film to clarify for narrative or comic purposes in the film is also something that I enjoy as an enhancement. The expressionistic set design and lighting that evokes the period also gives this film a surreal and offbeat taste to it in this picture. There is also the usage of hand-tinted colors that were done by using CG effects in the film to evoke the symbolic objects in this film, like red, green, or gold in a different sequence, that are often seen in other films, like Greed, for example. And finally, the use of monochromatic colors to remind the audience when the story takes place, like what time of day, or maybe the emotional mood of a sequence that is part of this narrative. I am in awe with Maddin's use of intertitles for the characters when they speak on screen in gold lettering, and the creative choice of using close-up shots, not usually done in ballet films, as well as jump cuts that makes this film uniquely his own. This film was released as a made-for-television film on February 28, 2002 in Canada. The film was later given a theatrical release in the United States in 2003, first at the Palm Beach International Film Festival on January 11th, then in New York City on May 14th, and now a limited release on May 16th. The film would be licensed and distributed by Zeitgeist Home Video in the United States in 2004. The film was met with critical praise after its release and won an International Emmy Award in 2002. I would recommend this film since it does take some liberties with the original story, but is in my opinion one of the most faithful adaptations of Bram Stoker's novel. It has an awesome cast, outstanding direction, wonderful ballet choreography from the Winnipeg Ballet, offbeat cinematography and set designs that makes it feel like a steampunk version of the story, and it's one of the best homages of silent cinema, sort of like Joseph von Sternberg, King Vidor, or maybe Erich von Stroheim, or any of those great masters of filmmaking that utilize these techniques in storytelling with some touches by the director Guy Maddin. This has been a Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez Minisode. Tune into the Minisodes every Monday at 12 p.m. and Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez every Friday at 4 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. If you are on Spotify, make sure to subscribe to my show and give it a positive rating in order for the show to keep getting recognition. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.